Hello fellow exiles, it's Scorpius. Today we're diving into what might just be one of the easiest and strongest endgame builds in Path of Exile 2. The Godly Spark Stormweaver Sorceress build. This powerhouse of a build revolves around the Spark ability, amplified by synergies with Archmage, Mana Tempest, and Sigil of Power. Sure, some might dismiss it as lazy or too straightforward, but trust me, this build is incredibly strong, blisteringly fast, and oddly satisfying to play. If you're still leveling your Sorceress, be sure to check out this guide right here, which focuses on campaign leveling. Once you've conquered the campaign, you can easily transition to the endgame Stormweaver build for optimized mapping. Now, speaking of powerful upgrades, imagine playing Path of Exile 2 on your phone, whether it's to level up a new character, farm currency, or stay in the game to sell your items. Well, it's now possible, and that's exactly what I've been doing, thanks to today's sponsor, Awesome. Awesome lets you remotely connect to your PC from your phone anytime, anywhere. Whether you're at work, lounging in bed, or out and about, you'll have complete control of your PC to do whatever you need. And it's not just for gaming. You can browse the web, transfer files, print remotely, or mirror your screen. All completely free. Upgrade to their Pro version for even more functionality, like remote CMD and controlling your Android devices. But my favorite feature, and the one I've been using the most, is their game package. This lets you access all of your PC games directly on your phone with zero lag, stuttering, or FPS drops. You can adjust mouse speed, customize keyboard layouts, and even use their drag type for WASD movement. Personally, I use Awesome to keep my character online to sell items or knock out low-tier maps for farming, all while I'm not even home. The first 200 subscribers who use the code Scorpius will get a 7-day free trial of the game package, which includes everything you need to take your gaming mobile. And getting started is simple. Follow the first link in the description to sign up. Click the second link to redeem code Scorpius for your 7-day trial. Download Awesome Remote on your PC, log in, and bind your device. Go to Settings, Security, and set an independent password. Finally, download the app on your phone, log in, select your device, type the password, and enjoy full access to your PC. Seriously, give it a try. You won't believe how smooth it is. And big thanks to Awesome for sponsoring this video. Now, back to the Sorceress build. First, we will dive into the abilities and support gems you'll need for this build and how they synergize with one another. Before we get into the details, here's the most important tip for this build. Level up your skills as often as you can. This step is absolutely critical for the Stormweaver Sorceress to reach its full potential. The damage boost from even a single skill level upgrade is massive. For example, if your skills are sitting at level 16 and you have access to a level 17 uncut skill gem or spirit gem, prioritize upgrading them immediately. It's a game changer. And don't forget, this applies to your auras as well. With that first tip out of the way, let's talk about your first most important ability. Spark. This is your primary damage dealing spell and the one you'll be using constantly. Spark launches multiple lightning projectiles that travel across the battlefield, damaging enemies in their path. What makes Spark even more effective is its ability to ricochet off walls and obstacles, ensuring that no projectile goes to waste. Here's an important tip for using Spark. Don't hold onto the ability while mapping or trying to escape danger. Although holding down the cast can launch more projectiles, it also significantly reduces your movement speed. Instead, aim to find a balance by casting Spark rhythmically while moving. This build's high movement speed and rapid casting time makes it easy to fill the screen with projectiles while staying agile and avoid damage. For support gems, Spark shines brightest with Rising Tempest, which enhances your elemental damage when you have multiple elemental types, which you'll get thanks to Flame Wall. Consider casting boosts your damage by 40% at the cost of some casting speed. No big deal since we already have plenty of it. Controlled Destruction adds a hefty 30% more damage, trading off critical hits, which isn't a concern for this build. And Acceleration increases projectile speed by 40%, letting your sparks hit more targets faster. If you're lucky enough to have a fifth link, Inspiration is your go-to. It reduces Spark's mana cost by 40%, making it much more sustainable. However, if you don't have a 5-link setup and struggle with mana, you can replace Acceleration with Inspiration to manage your resources more efficiently. Next up is Flame Wall, another key ability in this build. Flame Wall creates a fiery barrier that enhances any projectile passing through it, adding extra fire damage and igniting enemies. This synergy is why we used Rising Tempest with Spark, to supercharge the elemental damage from Flame Wall's effect. When using Flame Wall, you have some flexibility. Either cast Spark first and then Flame Wall, or set up the wall before spamming Spark. The key is to ensure your spark projectiles pass through the flame wall for maximum damage output. For support gems on Flame Wall, you want Fire Mastery, which boosts the skill level for even more damage, Fortress, which transforms the wall into a circular shape, giving you better coverage and utility, Mobility, which reduces the movement speed penalty when placing the ability by 30%, keeping you agile while casting Spark and Flame Wall, and lastly, Spell Cascade is the optimal fourth link. I experimented with multiple different options and I believe that Spell Cascade is the best option here. It spawns 2 additional flame rings in random locations near your initial flame wall, dramatically increasing the area of fire and giving your projectiles more opportunities to pick up the bonus damage. Next, let's talk about Orb of Storms and Conductivity. 2 abilities that are absolute game changers when dealing with tough rares and bosses. Orb of Storms creates a stationary orb of lightning that fires bolts at nearby enemies. Your goal is to position this orb directly on top of the boss or rare to maximize its impact. For support gems, you'll want Lightning Exposure to reduce the target's lightning resistance, Strip Away to enhance the effect of lightning exposure even further, Conduction to ensure an 100% chance to apply shock, and if you have a 4th link, Overabundance is an excellent choice, allowing you to place 2 orbs instead of 1. If you prefer more damage than utility, then you can instead drop Conduction and have Overabundance as your 3rd link. Just as important as Orb of Storms is Conductivity, another ability you'll use primarily against bosses or rares. Conductivity places a curse on the ground that triggers after a short delay. Enemies within the cursed area suffer a massive reduction in lightning resistance, which makes your lightning attacks hit exponentially harder. To make Conductivity even more effective, use these support gems. Heighten Curse to increase the curse's effect by 25%, and Expanse to boost the area of effect by 50%. If you'd like an alternative to Expanse, consider Focused Curse, which reduces the delay before the curse triggers, ensuring faster application against fast-moving or aggressive enemies. Now let's move on to Mana Tempest, a high-risk, high-reward ability designed specifically for bosses. Mana Tempest creates a storm that dramatically increases the damage of all of your mana-costing spells. However, it comes with a significant downside. It also skyrockets the mana cost of your abilities. The longer you remain in the storm, the more damage you'll deal, but the faster your mana pool will drain. Since this build revolves around using mana as a resource for both survival and damage, you'll need to be cautious about how greedy you get with Mana Tempest. Overextending in the storm can leave you vulnerable. To make Mana Tempest more manageable and efficient, pair it with Premeditation. This support gem increases your spell damage by 15%, allowing you to deal burst damage quicker without needing to stay in the storm for an extended period. Next up, we have the second most important ability in our build after Spark. Archmage. This is your primary damage enhancing aura, and it plays a pivotal role in maximizing your damage output. Archmage scales your damage based on your maximum mana. The more mana you have, the more damage you'll deal. Since this build focuses heavily on stacking mana, every point invested in your passive skill tree and every gear upgrade that increases your mana will directly boost your damage, making this aura indispensable for endgame progression. Your top support gem for Archmage is Lightning Mastery, which increases its level and further enhances its effects. Additionally, if you have spare spirit from gear, something you'll inevitably acquire as you progress, you should add Clarity as a secondary support. Clarity increases your mana regeneration rate, allowing you to sustain your abilities even better. Here's a quick but critical tip for Archmage. Don't just focus on leveling up the skill. Use gem cutting prisms to raise its quality to 20%. This increase in quality will further amplify its effectiveness, making it a core priority as you refine your build. Now let's move on to Grim Feast, one of the most popular defensive auras in the game right now. Grim Feast provides incredible survivability by causing enemies you kill to drop white orbs. Collecting these orbs replenishes your energy shield, effectively doubling it while you're clearing maps. With Grim Feast active, you'll be much harder to kill, especially during dense encounters. To run both Archmage with Clarity and Grim Feast, you'll need a total of 140 spirit. Since you get 100 spirit from the campaign, all you need is a piece of gear that adds plus 40 spirit to meet the requirement. This setup ensures that you can sustain both auras at the same time without compromising your mana pool or survivability. Finally, let's discuss Sigil of Power, a situational ability that comes from Chiming Staff, a specific weapon you'll want to equip in your second weapon set. Equipping this staff grants access to Sigil of Power, which you can then add to your main ability bar. This ability is a fantastic addition to your toolkit. When cast, it places a sigil on the ground that provides a significant spell damage buff. The more mana you spend while standing in the sigil, the stronger the buff becomes, making it perfect for burst damage against bosses or rares. Here's a key tip. When you cast Sigil of Power, it will automatically switch your weapon set from Primary Set 1 to Chiming Staff Set 2. To avoid disrupting your rotation, quickly swap back to your primary weapon set after casting. For support gems, you're going to want Persistence to extend the duration of the sigil and keep the buff active longer, and Magnified Effect to increase the area of the sigil, making it easier to stand within its range while engaging enemies. And since we're talking about weapon swapping and we already have 100 spirit, we can use Blink for extra mobility. What you want to do is add Blink into your skills. Then change Archmage's weapon set to 1 through the options in the ability tab and make sure the Blink is deactivated. Then set Blink's weapon set to set 2 and deactivate Archmage. This means that when you swap weapons, you will be able to use Blink. Definitely a great alternative to having an extra mobility spell. The support gem you want on Blink is Ingenuity. Now that we've covered all of the abilities and support gems, let's talk about skill rotations for different scenarios. For AoE situations, things are very straightforward. Start by placing Flame Wall and then casting Spark as often as possible. Remember to maintain your movement speed to clear maps faster. When dealing with multiple rares or a particularly strong rare enemy, adjust your strategy. Place Orb of Storms and Conductivity on the target, then Flame Wall and spam Spark to maximize your damage output. But when it comes to boss fights, your rotation becomes a little bit more structured. Place Orb of Storms, Flame Walls and Conductivity in the boss's area. Drop your Sigil of Power at your feet for the spell damage buff. Then activate Mana Tempest to boost your damage further. Hold down Spark to unleash as many projectiles as possible. As you execute your rotation, keep an eye on your mana. If it drops to 50% or if the boss launches a spell or hit on you, roll away to reposition while using Flame Wall and Spark. Reset your Sigil of Power and Mana Tempest whenever you're safe to do so to maximize burst damage. And with the rotation covered, let's dive into the most important part of this build, the passive skill tree. As always, I'll include a link to the written guide below for you to copy and explore, but it's crucial to understand the reasoning behind these choices. The passive skill tree not only shapes how you play and use your abilities, but also directly influences the stats you'll need to prioritize on your gear, something we'll discuss in detail next. When you examine the nodes in the skill tree, you'll notice a clear focus on building a strong defensive core while still enhancing our damage as much as possible. The centerpiece of this build is the Mind over Matter node, which makes your mana act as your HP. This means if you run out of mana and take a hit, you'll die. To support this mechanic, we prioritize a massive amount of mana regeneration, maximum mana, and energy shield through passive nodes and gear stats. A key highlight of this build is the synergy between Eldritch Battery and Mind over Matter. Eldritch Battery converts your energy shield into mana, creating a dual-purpose resource that boosts both your survivability and damage output. With this setup, your energy shield becomes a vital defensive layer that also fuels your offensive capabilities. Additionally, we take the Chaos Inoculation node. CI reduces your maximum HP to 1, but makes you completely immune to chaos damage, which is a huge benefit in many encounters. To break it down, here's how the layers of defense work in this build. Your Sorceress will technically have 1 HP, but a large energy shield pool will serve as your primary defense. Grim Feast doubles that energy shield during map clearing, making you incredibly hard to kill. For an enemy to kill you, they'll need to first deplete your energy shield, then drain your mana pool entirely, and finally land a single hit to remove your 1 remaining HP. Our goal is to make this process as difficult as possible for enemies by stacking specific stats, ensuring you remain both tanky and highly effective in combat. To start things off, our Ascendancy choice is Stormweaver, and the first 4 points will go to Constant Gale and Force of Will. This will give us a new buff called Arcane Surge, which grants 10% increased cast speed and 20% more mana regen. The remaining 4 points should go on Strike Twice for additional shocks and Scouring Winds for additional exposure, therefore more damage. For the remaining of the tree, I'm gonna assume that you're already in the endgame, as for leveling I have a different guide for you to follow. But obviously we have things like Raw Power Power for spell damage. We have the Practice Signs for the cast speed, mana regeneration nodes, as well as some defenses. And then we continue going upwards to the Arcane Blossom. Obviously, we get our Dampening Shield and our Mana Blessing here as well. And going all the way up, we want to focus on Overexposure and get the rest of the nodes here, as well as going to the right side, getting the Lightning up here, and getting all of the intelligence that we can get, and the Patient Barrier for even more Energy Shield. Before you make your way to the far right and eventually getting CI or things like Eldritch Battery, you can get a few nodes right here for the spell power, for the mana, and even more mana regen. But what we want to do is go to the far left right here, getting a couple of more jeweled sockets, and eventually getting into Touch the Arcane, Breaking Point, All Natural. Then eventually want to get Mind Over Matter. Immediately after, you want to get the Battery and then CI. After you have all of these three, you start picking off the rest of the nodes that you haven't gotten. For the jeweled sockets, the best jewel that you can target is Sapphire. And the stats you want to prioritize are things like max energy shield, spell damage, critical hit chance, critical spell damage bonus, elemental damage, duration of elements, and skill effect duration. Any kind of Sapphire that you have with more than 2 of these stats is considered really good until you can upgrade them again. The gear stats are pretty straightforward too. On the helmet, you want the main stat to be Energy Shield, with max mana and as many resistances as you can possibly get. Chest is similar, but with the addition of Spirit, so you can run Grim Feast and Clarity. Any intelligence you can get here is a plus. Same thing on the gloves. Energy Shield is the core with maximum mana, intelligence, and balancing your resistances. On the boots, you want Energy Shield once again, but here it's important to have at least 35% movement speed. Get some mana, intelligence, and of course rarity too. And if you need more resistances, then you can add them here. For the belt, however, it's crucial to try and get at least a second charm slot, as you want to be running 1 Stone Charm for the stuns and a Thawing Charm for the freeze. The stats here are once again max mana and resistances. Anything extra that you can get is a plus. Moving on to the rings, we want to focus on damage stats such as lightning damage and cast speed, as well as the usual mana stats and rarity. The best in slot amulet is Everlasting Gaze, but if you cannot afford to buy it, for now simply focus on the same stats as the rings. For the focus or the shield, you want to go with Energy Shield, spell damage, lightning damage, cast speed, and mana regen. And lastly, for the wand or staff, you want to go for spell damage, lightning damage, cast speed, max mana, and mana regen, as well as many levels to lightning spells as possible. This is the most important stat on the weapon. And that should cover all the most important details of the Godly Spark build for the Stormweaver Sorceress in Path of Exile 2. If you have any questions whatsoever regarding this build, feel free to comment down below and I'll make sure that I answer every single one of them. If you enjoyed this guide and it helped you in any way possible, then consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel so you can stay tuned with all Path of Exile 2 guides and content. Thank you very much for watching, and I'm gonna see you guys on the next one. Peace.